Ahoy and welcome. This is Admiral.
Wololo.
Wrapping up my CHIMOR build with unique units and technologies. Also a couple quick notes on some changes to earlier features.
And I have a few last-minute points to award.
First off, I've doubled the gold discount for barracks and naval technologies. In other words, those techs now cost no gold, and here are the updated savings per age. Savings were too negligible in the early game, so this makes it a little easier to justify their barracks dependence, and they have some nice momentum in early Imperial by being able to get elite infantry upgrades much more cheaply, although I have removed the halberdier upgrade. Next up, I've simplified the Champi by removing the construction ability. It was a cool thought that I mainly wanted for a scenario level, and may still see use on a future civilization. It was just overloading the unit with more abilities than you'd need or remember to use, and that made all other Champis look like Chumpies in terms of life skills. Being able to hunt, herd, and repair is more than enough for handyman credentials. I've also given it +1 line of sight, not least because all Champis are still kind of crappy scouts after the nerf bomb, but because the CHIMOR need to be able to scout more efficiently to still make appropriate use of their gather bonus. I've also introduced a 4th civ bonus, namely that archery range units are 20% cheaper. The barracks is still your go-to for power units, but this gives them more accessible ranged counters, and a ton of early flexibility, including incentives to go for your otherwise terrible archer line. For reference, this is very slightly better than the Koreans' total resource savings on archers, and somewhat worse than their saving on skirmishers, but as we've talked about, the CHIMOR archer line dead ends after feudal age. This is mainly about making them less one-dimensional in early game, and providing easier access to archers as an infantry counter before they pass that torch to slingers in Castle Age. If it's too powerful in Feudal Age, I'd stagger it to 15% in Feudal and 20% in Castle Age. One other change is to the Ayapekan Workshop. Previously this was an upgrade to the settlement, but for modding reasons I do have to change this. The building's resource storage doesn't update properly if it's an upgrade to an existing building, so it has to be built separately. In line with that, it no longer has the universal drop site function of the settlement, but it can accept the type of resource the workshop specializes in. Other than that, it has the same functions explained in the dedicated video on it. Note that this is not an aura building like the fortified church. It affects all your villagers doing a specific task regardless of where they are or where they drop off. With that out of the way, let's move into uncharted territory with the unique units. Their Castle Age unique unit is an expensive heavy infantry called the Alek. Alek refers to the most powerful nobles, ultra-elites like great feudal lords, which contributed to the ranks of CHIMOR generals like Pakatnamu or Kerotumi, and Alek the idea of a somewhat heavily armored American unit, for which the CHIMOR may be the best possible candidate. Moche soldiers are generally shown wearing heavier armor than most units of the last chieftain civs, and over 1,000 years earlier as well, and along with Sikan and CHIMOR nobles, were buried with unrivaled quantities of metal equipment and accessories, approaching the closest the New World ever got to full-body metal armor. These were usually just surface-treated copper or prestige alloys in the early eras, but in some cases evolved to the higher-performing arsenical bronze, especially by the Sikan and late CHIMOR. On top of that, or rather under that, they wore tightly woven cotton armor similar to what the Inca used, and with cotton being particularly abundant on the north coast. Conceptually, the unit is kind of a cross between a Kamayuk and a Sergeant, a lance-wielding unit with half a tile of range and heavy armor for an American unit. Rather than a defining innate gimmick centered around a particular mechanic, it's characterized by some uncommon but useful variations in basic stats, including extra attack speed, although not enough to rival the samurai. It also has 4 infantry armor and a bit of conversion resistance, although it doesn't do much bonus damage, so it's mainly a stat beast. It is extremely gold heavy, nearly as much so as a Mameluke, but performs well against most melee units, including most other civilizations' heavy infantry, which are strong against all of the CHIMOR barracks units. I made sure it still gets destroyed by Teutonic Knights, and of course it will lose to Samurai and Cataphracts, but otherwise it's pretty versatile. It can't solo a Paladin, but can beat them in large enough groups when you can bring the extra range to bear. When you can afford them, the Alek is your go-to unit for population efficiency, and along with the Slinger, helps reduce the civilization's otherwise crippling weakness to stronger infantry units. Moving on, their second unique unit is a ship called the Utstup, meaning something like large reed boat, and available in Feudal Age. If I could have a unique graphic for this, it would be this type of boat with animal heads, but this ship from Chronicles will have to do. It's sort of a cross between a New World longboat, as it fires multiple javelins, and an all-purpose combat ship, but kind of overpriced if you were just looking for combat stats. Although it does have a couple other features that can make it worthwhile. First off, it can transport foot units, that is, non-siege land units. 5 for the regular version and 10 for the Elite, which is available in Castle Age. Secondly, it can serve as a drop site for villagers collecting coastal resources. Mainly shorefish, but anything close enough to the water to be efficient will do. On a water map, you would use this to collect shorefish with villagers much more efficiently than would otherwise be possible. But of course it's only available from the Feudal Age, when that can be contested by enemy warships. Its final unique aspect is that in addition to being available at the dock, it can be built on the coast by villagers. So it's flexible both in terms of its role and manner of production. But that comes at a price. So while it's a good supplement to your navy, it's really not viable to mass them, at least in the early game. The Moche and Chimu gathered many types of marine and coastal resources, including sea lions and especially guano harvesting from offshore islands. Incidentally, guano is a mind-blowingly effective fertilizer that led to a worldwide Peruvian guano rush in the 1800s, and wasn't outperformed until the advent of modern synthetic fertilizers. So there's some historical basis for a more powerful food or gold bonus for the Civ if it was ever needed. But for now, I'll leave that on the table. Moving on to unique technologies, and continuing the naval theme, their Castle Age unique tech is called Apisek Ni, meaning something like knowledge of the sea. We've already talked at length about the history of their naval specialties and legendary origin, so I won't repeat much here other than to say that the Chimu maritime capabilities, very impressive for the New World, yet far behind the Old World ship for ship, at least had the advantage that their reed and balsa boats were much cheaper and easier to make. The effect of this technology is to reduce the gold and population cost of galley line and Utstups by 40%. Not an immediate power spike like a stat boost, but it helps you make your ships for longer and make more of them, which is great given that you have no Imperial Age ship line upgrades. So you have an important window in late Castle Age where you have the cost advantage, but don't yet have to deal with the upgrade deficit. And even in Imperial, you're not entirely underwater, and you can still play the Piranha by massing your swarms of weaker but more spammable ships. As a quick look into how that plays out in Imperial Age, in terms of population, with all else being equal, you could get up to 66% more galley line ships than your opponent with the same population space, which is about the numbers advantage you'd need to eke out a win versus generic galleons. But of course you'll get destroyed by any civilization with a good late-game galleon bonus. It's kinda crazy how much better galleons are than war galleys. Of course this only affects those two ships, and kind of oversells the comparison, as you don't quite have the production advantage to maintain 66% higher naval output consistently, in addition to having lower range with only war galleys. So while their late-game naval power tapers off, and they're not in the late-game league of civilizations like Vikings, Portuguese, Koreans, or Italians, it's far from the titanic disaster you'd expect from their tech tree alone. Their Imperial Age unique technology is called Sikan Kutsed, literally something like Shining Stars of the Moon Temple. Although as we've already talked about, Sikan also refers to a culture that influenced and was conquered by CHIMOR. So we'll take it as Bright Stars of Sikan. And their brightest star, metaphorically, was of course the most comprehensively advanced pre-Inca metalwork in the Americas, used to create literal shining star-headed maces, axes, and other kinds of weapons. If you'll indulge me in another metaphor, this is also a reference to the Andean association between precious metals and celestial bodies. Gold was envisioned as sweat of the sun, and silver-colored metals, including actual silver, as well as alloys like arsenical bronze, which has much more of a silvery appearance than tin bronze, were associated with the moon, which was the primary object of worship among the Chimu. Copper itself was sometimes associated with the stars, and all three metals were closely connected to the Chimu creation legend, with humans being said to have been born either from stars or cosmic eggs, one of gold, one of silver, and one of copper, and corresponding to the social status of the individual. Anyway, the effect of this technology is that infantry and hulks destroy armor with every second hit. So it's pretty good, but maybe not as crazy as it sounds for most units. In the case of elite champis, for example, it's an even one-on-one fight with Mapuche champis that get their 15 extra hit points for free, but the Chimu win handily in larger battles. In the case of Moon Temple Guards, it's obviously very good, and this is why they can't have the elite upgrade. For the Alek, it's quite good as well due to their faster base attack, although the earlier battles shown with it already factored in the effect of this unique technology. In the case of hulks, this puts the Chimu War Hulk roughly on par with the generic Carrack. They're a little squishier, but have the advantage of softening enemy ships up for ranged fire from your cheaper war galleys. As for why the infantry effect is every other hit, the main reason is just realism. To reflect the lesser performance of bronze, and not get too carried away beyond what is justifiable and necessary for gameplay reflecting relative continental strengths. That said, bronze weapons were still very effective in certain roles, and even survived in the old world alongside iron for a long time. There's a great video by Matt Easton covering some of this. And blunt force weapons like bronze star-headed maces, well less stellar than steel, or hybrid weapons like heavy axes, could still break steel scale and chainmail and crush bones through them, as the mass and geometry is more relevant in that role than the material. Of course, bronze maces were not very effective against full plate, although most weapons weren't, and the game greatly underrepresents the advantages of heavy plate armor. But the bronze star-headed mace of the Chimu and Inkra was one of their greatest military innovations, yet strangely not mentioned in the official introduction of the Champi, which instead emphasizes rare and impractical jewelry-grade materials like gold and tumbaga. The Moche were particularly famous for long two-handed maces, which would have packed quite a wallop, and are thought to have given the Moche a significant military advantage over their neighbors. So that wraps up my Chimu build. We've already seen the tech tree, but here it is again, and let me know what you think about the design. I'm still working on the mod for this build as I want to release it in conjunction with something else, but there will be an announcement for that in the near future. That's all for today, and thanks for watching. This has been me concluding creation of a crafty, cool, and capable civilization. Till next time.